The United Nations Special Committee had advocated separate Jewish and Arab states as the uneasy compromise.
November the 29th, 1947. A decisive step is taken towards the realization of the Zionist aim of a Jewish state in Palestine. The radical idea THEODOR HERZL had proposed just over 50 years earlier was about to become reality.
The Jewish state will include the ports of...
The United Nations Resolution 181 was to partition Palestine into separate states. One Jewish and one Arab, with the Jerusalem area coming under international control.
Giving the Jews a state was the remarkable, unique, in fact, departure from world history. And they were giving it to them, basically, I think, because of a guilty conscience, partly connected with the Holocaust, and also connected to Christendom's treatment of Jews for the previous 2,000 years.
But the decision made in New York did not have the consent of Palestine's Arabs and would lead to a bitter conflict. The first Jewish settlers had begun to immigrate to Palestine in the 1880s. But under the British Mandate, instituted in 1920, their numbers swelled. Many of the European newcomers believed that Palestine was a land without people for a people without land. A myth that was to lead to tragedy. For far from being unpopulated, Palestine was home to hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Arabs.
Arab opposition to the Zionist project was inevitable, predictable, and inescapable from the beginning. The only way to realize the Zionist project was unilaterally and by military force.
Tensions between the indigenous Arabs and Jewish immigrants simmered throughout the 20s and 30s, with sporadic outbreaks of violence, contained for the most part by British military rule. The kibbutzim and agricultural settlements the Zionists had built as socialist utopias increasingly resembled armed fortresses, each with its own wall and tower, guarded around the clock from potential Arab attack. Military training entered the curriculum as young people were recruited to the Haganah, or Jewish Defense Force. 1936 witnessed the most serious crisis yet.
We went on strike for 6 months. We boycotted both the Jews and the English, but it started with the English. At that time, we used to tell ourselves that if we only got rid of the English, we'd be able to deal with the Jews ourselves.
But getting rid of the English was easier said than done. And far from leaving, the British rulers attempted to crush the uprising by force, greatly expanding their military presence and establishing curfews in the major cities. More than 120 Arabs were sentenced to death and many more imprisoned. The main Arab leader, Haj Amin al-Husseini, fled Palestine to escape arrest. But these measures failed to quell the violence.
At St. James's Palace, a conference is hoping to arrive at a solution of the Arab-Jewish problem of Palestine.
And in 1939, the British announced a major policy change. The White Paper set quotas on Jewish immigration for 5 years, after which time a binational state would be established, with any further Jewish immigration being contingent on Arab support. The Jews felt utterly betrayed.
It was not just a question of the British being a foreign government. It was also a question of opening the gates of the country for Jewish immigration.
The outbreak of World War II in September 1939 posed a dilemma for Palestine's Jews.
Well, you know what Mr. Ben Gurion said, and that was a very, I think, wise thing. We will fight the Nazis as if there is no white paper. We will fight the white paper as if there are no Nazis. So we volunteered to serve in the British Army. This was quite a difficult decision for people who were constantly anti-British, saw the British as enemies, and all of a sudden I'm going to be a member of the British Army? Yes.
Tamar, like many Jews, gained valuable military experience from enlisting in the Allied war effort and in the Jewish Brigade established by the British in 1944, experience that would soon be put to use.
Only those in need of medical attention are taken ashore.
For after World War II, and despite pressure from the Zionists and the United States to let in European Jews, the British refused to ease their immigration quotas.
16 persons die and 13
In anger,
others are injured.
the Jews turned on their former sponsor. A militia known as the Irgun, or HERZL in Hebrew, first established after the Arab Revolt of 1936, grew more militant, attacking both Arab and British targets. The group was led by Menachem Begin, later Prime Minister of Israel.
HERZL was a split movement from the Haganah, and while the Haganah claimed Havlaga, namely restraint, which meant not to attack Arab civilians unless attacked by them, the HERZL had no such compunctions.
Yuri AVNERY joined the illegal organization as a boy.
Living in the underground gives you a feeling of superiority, because when you walk in the street and you have a pistol left between books under your armpit and you know that people are being hanged for keeping weapons, it gives you a wonderful feeling of danger, of living. You really live more.
July 1946 witnessed the deadliest terrorist attack of its era. Its perpetrators were Jewish Irgun members. Disguised as Arab waiters, they bombed the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, the British Mandate's military headquarters. 91 people were killed, British, Arabs and Jews, the majority civilian staff of the hotel. But in an irony that can only be appreciated in view of Israel's subsequent stance towards terrorism, the bombing is today celebrated as a step towards national liberation. The intricacies of its planning set out in this Tel Aviv museum. The British responded to the attack by rounding up Irgun activists. Many of them were kept here in the citadel of the Palestinian city of Acre, used by the British as a prison. Jews, too, were now executed alongside the leaders of Arab militias, although it's only the Jews who are commemorated here today.
It was not just Jews against the British, it was the Jews against the Arabs. It was a triangle in which everybody hated everybody else and fought everybody else.
As the violence spiraled out of control, the British began to question their continued presence in Palestine. Exhausted and nearly bankrupt after the Second World War, the British people had little appetite for further foreign adventures.
They found themselves as the punching bag of both Jews and Arabs. They decided enough is enough, to cut their losses and to leave the country.
The British handed over the matter to the United Nations, an organization formed in the wake of the Second World War to prevent conflict. In November 1947, it voted to partition Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states. Despite constituting less than 1/3 of the population, the Jews were to get over half of Mandate Palestine, with significant Arab populations remaining in the new Jewish state.
You have to understand that the real celebration was after the decision by the United Nations, because then we knew that we prepared ourselves to the great day, and the great day is coming. And we knew that we'll have to fight for it.
But Palestine's Arabs did not join in the celebrations.
The Arabs felt that Palestine was an Arab country. They couldn't understand for the life of them why the international community was suddenly giving part of their land, the Arab land, to the Jews. They said, we live here. Suddenly these interlopers have started moving in here. We don't know Jewish history. We don't care about Jewish history. We don't know that there is really any connection between them and this land. And even if there is, it was 2,000 years ago.
Far from preventing conflict, the United Nations resolution to partition Palestine was to lead to all-out war.